Imagine yourself an ancient great worm, a draconic king among the mightiest of all living creatures. Your scales rival the greatest armor ever forged, your breath a molten furnace of elemental force, your hoard a gleaming mountain of conquest, trophies, and centuries of ambition exceeding that of a kingdom many times over. You rule your domain with absolute impunity. You fear nothing, except perhaps the one enemy you are incapable of defeating. As you eclipse a millennia of sovereignty, your body and mind only grow stronger. Your kind feels not the physical withering of time's incessant march, yet you are beholden to the finality it brings to the living, as each setting sun now wakes to remind you. You, who have conquered nations and leveled mountains, must watch the undignified ticking of a clock that says even you are powerless to halt this shroud of death and the non-existence your kind has long accepted it brings. For a proud species who abandoned the dogma of organized religion long ago, coupled with a level of chromatic hubris and arrogance that itself borders on divinity, it is not hard to imagine how the end of existence and the surrender of all you have acquired may instill a level of dread never before experienced. Then they come, mortals, humans, insignificant specks groveling at the foot of your throne while whispering prophecy and promise in your ear. Immortality, a world where undying dragons will rule eternal, their reign absolute and unending. All you have to do is drink from their chalice, a profane sacrament of forbidden magic and total subjugation. To become eternal, you must first trust, then surrender to their promise. A supine soul shackled to belief, not unlike that of your ancestors 31,000 years ago. That is the supreme Faustian bargain offered by the subject of today's exploration into the cult of the dragon and its brilliant but supremely flawed founder. This deepest of lore dives will reveal not only the levels of narcissism required to accept such a pact, but those mortals foolish enough to actually believe they could ever hold the leash. The cult of the dragon has experienced the ebb and flow of dramatic change over the centuries and exists today as a self-interested and semi-religious organization splintered by an ideological divide. But it was not always this way, so we must start from the very beginning. This ominous secret society was born from a singular, flawed ideology that would, over time, evolve into the cult's core doctrine, a doomsayer gospel of undeath as dominion. The cult of the dragon's original faith embraced followers devoted to the worship and veneration of the Dracolich, a form of undead dragon which, in their view, was the supreme ideal of draconic power. A cult in every sense of the word, this malignant collective is, at least to those on the outside looking in, based primarily upon a grand misinterpretation of an already dubious ancient omen. Their purpose, even existence from the outset, was based on a bedrock of control, positioning themselves for a new world order, driven by its primary apocalyptic goal, to accelerate and bring forth a prophecy where undead dragon kings are destined to rule all of Toril. This dogma, drawn directly from the founder's own twisted scripture, is the lie, or for the more charitable, the delusion that established the cult's early identity, one that is intrinsically anathema to the living. Every great deceit needs a structure to sustain it, and to peddle such lies you need believers. To control those believers, you need a hierarchy. Operating from regional cells across the Forgotten Realms, the Cult of the Dragon's original structure comprised just two distinct membership tiers. Those believers accepting their foretold destiny first became initiates to the cult, each required to choose a representative chromatic color of the dragon type with whom they felt the most affinity. These initiates would then be included in the cult's most common grouping, followers of the Scaly Way, a catch-all moniker that clearly expressed their straightforward, if ominous, theology. Inside the cult's leadership nucleus, a second tier existed, keepers of the secret hoard, a title reserved for senior members, the most ardent supporters of the Founder's prophesied destiny, mankind serving the supremacy and eternal reign of undead dragon kings. Among those making up this group were mages, mostly necromancers, evil-aligned priests, as well as the most infamous and depraved of assassins, thieves, warriors, and other fervent criminal minds, each who successfully exhibited their belief and zealotry in the Founder's vision. An inner circle of those holding the Keeper's title also controlled finances and access to a given cell's copy of the cult's unholy scripture, the Tome of the Dragon. Of that group, only select leaders actually possess the secret arcane knowledge required to enact the cult's forbidden rituals, each intended to transform the dragons they courted to offer their special brand of immortality. Later leadership of the modern era that we will detail, later in this deep dive, would eventually add significant depth to the organizational hierarchy, as well as challenge the cult's core ideology and even its prophetic visions. These hierarchical changes would include further subdividing the followers of the Scaly Way, starting with the rank of Dragonclaw, designating the most basic rank and file of the faith, progressing upward to the rank of Dragon Wing, denoting the ROTC-like ambition of junior officers of the cult. This would be followed by the rank of Dragonfang, a promotion for the cult's middle management as it were, and finally ending the escalation of dragon body parts with the insignia of Dragon Soul, a rank offered to core officers of the cult, usually reserved for those zealots with promising necromantic powers, but who are not yet part of the cult's innermost cadre. Additionally, as the cult continued to evolve in the modern age, new leadership titles for the organization's most powerful would also be added, most notably the title Wearer of Purple, reserved for the most accomplished and influential of the cult's overseers. In the coming centuries, the dragon cult would expand into many new regions all across the realms, such as the Dalelands, the Dragon Coast, the Sunset Mountains, Neverwinter, and even Waterdeep, among many more. The operations of these cells were each overseen by one holding this esteemed title. Designated by their vibrant colored robes of violet, the wearers of purple are the opulent figures of authority in charge of advancing the cult's evolving vision. This modern-age organizational structure would remain in place until the 15th century, when the Spell Plague would bring about the cult's most recent update. Reserved for the highest echelon of membership, Wormspeaker is a special rank and title exclusive to only the 5 most powerful Lord-like leaders of the cult, each representing one of the 5 primary colors of the chromatic dragon. Yet for all the lofty titles, opulent robes, and color-coded fanaticism, a Wormspeaker cannot summon an apocalypse on faith alone. Doomsday, as it turns out, is expensive, and to pay for the end of the world, you need a business plan. To marginalize the dragon cult as nothing more than an insane sect of zealots would be a mistake. While they may well be insane, and their vision will find significant evolution as we progress through this discovery, they are a secretive organization that operates on many fronts. The cult's longevity is revealed not only by its proclamations of faith and apocalypse, but in the more mundane aspects of its day-to-day ledger. Mandates may evolve, but the need for gold is constant. The cult has felt the winds of change brought on through 5 centuries and well understands the practical necessities required in order to meet the economic demands of their nefarious goals. This is visible in the organization's intelligence gathering network and its many criminal enterprises. From black markets, widespread brigandry, extortion, coercion, smuggling, and illicit trade, each plays a vital role in funding the advancement of its prophetic vision and, like any good religious institution, the personal enrichment of its leaders. Perhaps the cult's most defining feature and the key to its long persistence is found in its decentralization, the lack of a single, vulnerable head. The cult's litany of affiliate cells routinely operate independently, reporting to a local wearer of purple who maintains varying degrees of allegiance to a central doctrine. While this engineered lack of unity often leads to internal clashes between rival factions, it also grants a not insignificant level of institutional resilience that centralized organizations might otherwise suffer. However, the genesis of this continent-spanning doomsayer cult did not arise from the villainous ambitions of a dark god or the ancient edicts of a fallen power. It began with a child. The Cult of the Dragon's origin story really begins with a young boy, left without a mother or father, whose earliest life and history is a deliberate obfuscation of conflicting tales and grandiose legends. Despite the odds placed upon a most unfortunate start to life, this unwanted mortal orphan was not born evil, and would in fact grow to find the divine favor of a goddess. Yet this would not be a story of fate and celestial glory, but one of psychological scarring and inner turbulence, displaying as reckless pride and compulsive obsession. A mortal human who would pursue the divine not for piety, but for permanence. The Dragon Cult, his cult, a final defense against a lifelong war of mental discord and insignificance. That human boy was named Sammaster, said born in the year of the Black Fist, 800 DR, although even his birth date can be called nothing more than an educated guess. A myriad of rumor and legend, Sammaster's origins and early life offer a range of conflicting accounts and tales that sound best suited for the tavern. These grand embellishments include a father's origin ranging from the noble to the necromantic, and a mother born with diametrically opposed roots from that of a fiend to a gentle wood nymph. Much of what we do know is chronicled in the text of the eponymously named 2nd edition resource, The Cult of the Dragon, and it is on those pages where we learn Sammaster's childhood was scarred by the premature loss of both his parents. Sages posit that the neglect or outright abuse common to orphans of that era may have forged the deep-seated psychological vulnerabilities that would later have significant influence on the pages of history. The lore suggests this early trauma may also be linked to a diminished physical disposition, exhibited by a weakened constitution. This is gleaned from accounts by Sammaster's first mentor, a traveling mage named Nethos. Nethos would describe Sammaster as a tall, handsome, but somewhat frail, almost gaunt boy with pale complexion and dark brown hair, often falling ill with fits of trembling, while also noting Sammaster as possessing keenly acute senses that often led to agitation and sudden outbursts. As a quick meta side note, I find the unique traits outlined in reading this 2E lore quite interesting, clearly defining characteristics that one might diagnose today as on the spectrum. Nevertheless, the historical record becomes only slightly more reliable beginning in 817 DR, the year of the Deadly Torch. Sammaster, presumed to be about 17 years old, would only now begin any known form of arcane study, definitely falling into the category of late bloomer. However, despite being far older than customary, Sammaster was taken on as an apprentice mage by Nethos. Although himself a figure of little historical importance, the lore does credit Nethos as recognizing a brilliant mind of vast potential behind the boy's large, somber brown eyes. His accounts also noting, even at this young age, a strong tendency toward an all-consuming obsession, a character trait that would follow the boy into adulthood. This would be revealed as Sammaster often sacrificed sleep and sustenance to absorb and master each new magical principle Nethos taught him. By the year of Broken Locks, 818 DR, Sammaster, now understood to be a young prodigy, was introduced to the formal worship of Mystra, quickly becoming an ardent follower of the mother of all magic. Sammaster's rapidly growing power, however, was accompanied by a notable restlessness, marked by chaotic patterns across his relationships and an inability to settle in and focus on any one area of study. Still, Sammaster's trajectory toward arcane mastery was nothing short of astounding. So advanced was his craft that he left Nethos' tutelage by 825 DR, having long eclipsed his mentor's arcane abilities and therefore his utility. For several years, the young mage journeyed incessantly, seeking out powerful figures only to quickly outstrip their knowledge and move on. Despite the disadvantages of such a late start in the practice of the arcane and his poor health, Sammaster still achieved the rank of Archmage in the year of the billowed sail, 835 DR, a feat almost universally unheard of for his age. His brilliance soon expanded to the abstract nature of the weave, showing strong fascination and acumen with the underlying theories of magic itself. By the year of the Fighting Sage, 840 DR, Sammaster had pioneered, rediscovered, or significantly improved numerous magical theories and techniques now categorized under the advanced and complex grouping of spells known as metamagic. And it would be this work, the dangerous attempt to deconstruct and improve upon the mechanics of the weave, that drew the goddess of magic's attention. For Sammaster, the pinnacle of his arcane discovery arrived in the year of the Jasmal Blade, 851 DR. Mystra, impressed by the now 51-year-old human archmage, appeared to him near the ruins of Myth Draenor in the Dalelands to offer him the mantle of the Chosen of Mystra, an esteemed and divine designation previously reserved for such luminaries as Elminster Amar, Illustriel Silverhand, and Lord Blackstaff himself, Kelvin Aronson. It would be in this moment that the lore offers us one of the first significant clues of a mind both genius yet psychologically frail. Sammaster, viewing Mystra as the object of his intense intellectual and physical passion, is said to have wept at her feet, instantly accepting the divine elevation, but also immediately believing that they were deeply in love. As a Chosen, Sammaster was invested with immense new powers, such as many immunities, improved health, and perhaps the most notable, control over silver fire, the raw, purifying magical energy of the weave. Mystra directed the Archmage immediately to Shadowdale and the Tower of the Sage Elminster to learn control of these overwhelming new abilities. Sammaster, driven by his usual obsessive focus, mastered his powers with alarming speed, said to have departed Shadowdale after only 3 seasons. Yet this period under Elminster's tutelage would inadvertently prove corrosive. The Sage of Shadowdale, ever the pragmatic and oftentimes blunt observer, had tried to provide clarity to Sammaster's delusional belief in reciprocal passion from the goddess of magic, repeatedly pointing out that Mystra's true love was the deity Azuth. However, as history would point out at every opportunity, Sammaster's mind operated differently. While clearly intellectually brilliant, the lore provides strong evidence of logical deficiencies and flaws in social reasoning and human relationships. This, coupled with hubris and a fragile ego, resulted in the Archmage internalizing this unwelcome truth as nothing more than jealous undermining. The seeds of resentment had taken root, and by 854 DR, the stage was set. Sammaster possessed literally God-given powers of the divine and unparalleled arcane genius, but also a growing sense of resentment and betrayal. In the ever-chimeric eyes of the Archmage, he had risen beyond the capabilities of most any mortal. Indeed, Sammaster was standing at the summit of mortal potential, armed with the fire of a goddess and a mind sharp enough to cut reality. But as the lore to follow will show, the air is thin at the top, and Sammaster was about to learn that the only thing faster than the ascent to glory is the terminal velocity of the fall. Holding the quasi-divine status of Chosen of Mystra was a sacred gift, one bestowed from a goddess to a brilliant mortal mind. Silver fire, the pure essence of the weave that Sammaster now possessed, was a blessing earned, not given, and with it came an immense burden of accountability. With hands trembling of insecurity and resentment, Sammaster may have never fully understood this, or more likely never had the faith, self-control, and/or mental fortitude to wield such celestial power responsibly. The undoing of Sammaster from celebrated Archmage to demented prophet of undeath can be charted by a series of psychological crises, each stripping away another layer of his sanity and morality. While these vulnerabilities likely existed since the reading of his first arcane spell, the earliest chronicled event to demonstrate a break in Sammaster's moral compass occurred in the Year of Cornerstones, 855 DR, during a chance encounter with a large caravan from Gentel Keep traveling between Cormyr and the Dalelands. While the Gent of this age should not be confused with the Gentar Rim, also known as the Black Network that would be formed by the Black Cloak Wizard Manshun 4 centuries later, there do exist trace lineage as traders in the illicit with their own self-serving history. This particular caravan just so happened to be in the slaver trade, a practice which infuriated the Archmage. Sammaster engaged the Gent forces with the hope of freeing the captives. However, he severely underestimated the reaction of the escorting mercenaries, who immediately began using the enslaved as hostage and shield, some even outright slaying the helpless caged prisoners. For the mind of the rational, seeing the cruel Gent use the innocent as a callous show of force would give one pause to consider the ethics of their actions. However, this would not be the case for Sammaster. Witnessing such vile and cowardly actions brought forth a careless rage, with the Archmage unleashing a relentless storm of arcane magic and the silver fire bestowed him by Mystra. With reckless fury, Sammaster would slay mercenaries and innocents alike, his uncontrolled attacks intended to protect, resulting in atrocity, executing the very lives he meant to save. In the aftermath, Sammaster retreated into a period of deep seclusion, and for approximately the next 6 years, the once promising Chosen of Mystra isolated himself, plunging into exhaustive new research, abandoning the tenets of his goddess to investigate the boundaries between life, death, and as history would reveal, undeath. This isolation and dark study, born initially from a desire to restore innocent lives like those that he had extinguished, soon warped from restorative magic to a more perverse fascination with the states beyond mortality. Sammaster's growing obsession with life's fragility led him to aggressively seek out the very creatures civilized mages shunned, cultivating relationships with higher undead, including vampires and liches, both of which would have lasting impacts upon dragonkind, seeing these eternal beings as worthy subjects for his study into the afterlife. His experiments would yield several original and innovative theories, as well as unlocking new necromantic enchantments, demonstrating that though his motivation had skewed to the dark, his genius had most certainly not diminished. The lore also tells us this foray into the darkest arts was viewed by Mystra with a sense of academic detachment. The clear lack of any culpable guilt through the inaction of the goddess of magic may initially feel out of place, until you realize that Mystra, especially in this era and incarnation, was very much a neutral goddess, far more interested in the advancement of magical theories and technique than any ethics or the means by which this new knowledge might be acquired. As long as Sammaster pushed the frontiers of arcane discovery forward, even through such unholy practices, the goddess of magic would take no action to prevent Sammaster's spiraling and unchecked descent into necromancy. The ever-reclusive Archmage would reappear on the pages of history in the Year of the Exploding Oral, 861 DR, emerging in the northern city of Silvery Moon, where he encountered Illustrial Silverhand, the Lady of Hope as she was often called, is one of the 7 sisters and a Chosen of Mystra. Illustriel, who governed the city under her maiden name of Elu, was a figure of beauty and grace that immediately captivated the Archmage, perhaps stirring a fierce but misguided passion in Sammaster, not unlike his reverence for Mystra. For an all-too-fleeting period, Illustriel's inherent kindness seemed to offer a palliative easing of the mage's mind, her radiant presence providing a temporary anchor, stabilizing the most extreme eccentricities born of Sammaster's emotional and mental wounds. The solace found in the arms of a loved one, however, was not to last. Sammaster's intellectual passion for the darkest of arts and his prior devotion to Mystra had established a pattern that would set course and trajectory for the Archmage's life, once again transforming admiration into unhealthy obsession. Alustriel soon became the target of this unhealthy fixation, a subject to be controlled and made to orbit only his existence. The kind but fiercely independent Lady of Hope naturally recoiled from Sammaster's attempts to dominate her, disturbed equally by his possessive nature as his growing obsession with the dark arts. The inevitable dissolution arrived only 3 years after their initial meeting. 864, known as the Year of the Broken Branch, was disastrous for Sammaster's already fractured mental state. Bitterness found root in his heart, propelling the increasingly unhinged mage back into seclusion and a deeper immersion into the forbidden studies of necromancy. The loss of any grounded connection to caring and humanity only served to reaffirm a loss of faith in the stability or necessity of mortal bonds, paving the way for a more destructive influence. Having lost the emotional safe harbor afforded by the Lady of Hope, the necromantic archmage sank into a low ebb that would prove ripe for a new, malefic corruption. Into this mental low tide stepped Algashan Nether, a devout priest of the god of tyranny, Bane. Algashan would attach himself to the emotionally crippled Sammaster around 865, the year of Flame Dance, near Baldur's Gate, masquerading as a sympathetic mage. The lore describes the Banite priest as possessing a, quote, devious evil mind, sharp as a razor, end quote, a trait that the events to follow would only confirm. Algashan was a formidable and sinister cleric whose hidden mission was to further a core tenet of the Church of Bane, that its priests should seek out, empower, and find influence over rising would-be tyrants. By manipulating powerful but weak-minded pawns, the Church of Bane would leverage their unseen control to increase oppression all across the realms. In Sammaster, Algashan correctly identified a supreme candidate for such covert manipulation, an individual of immense arcane prowess and growing dark ambitions, rendered unstable by rejection and doubt, highly susceptible to corruption and control that could be wielded for Bane's own plots against the goddess of magic. The infiltration began insidiously, as it most often does, by filling a frail ego with flattery, adulation, and delusion. Algashan feigned deep admiration for Sammaster's arcane mastery, swiftly ingratiating himself as a comrade in art, slowly commencing a calculated poisoning of his delicate psyche. He relentlessly preyed upon the necromancer's vulnerabilities, doubts, and self-perception, carefully crafting a venomous narrative expertly balanced in praise and victimhood. At every turn, Algashan would redirect inherent rage and guilt, convincing Sammaster that all his misfortunes, the calamity with the Gent, the scorn of Elminster, even and especially the breakup with Alustriel, not as failings of his own, but treachery at the hands of an uncaring goddess in Mystra and her envious servants, all threatened by Sammaster's growing greatness. The true objective of this indoctrination was to steal the secret of silver fire for Bane's vile purposes. Algashan repeatedly pushed Sammaster to wield his silver fire, ostensibly justifying the immense emotional cost that the gift incurred, but functionally allowing the Banite priest to study its arcane mechanics. The year of the stricken star, 875, would mark a climax of this grand manipulation, unfolding in a region of the savage frontier called the Evermoors, just west of Silvery Moon. Algashan successfully coerced Sammaster into plotting an ambush of his former lover, intending to employ a sinister clerical ceremony, empowered by the Black Hand himself, in order to still the silver fire from the Chosen. The Lady of Hope was returning to Silvery Moon when she encountered only a shell of the man she once called her love. Sammaster's assault began verbally, a rage of tears and accusations he had harbored since their split, now well over a decade past. Alustriel's complete surprise at his state of being and sudden outrage left her unprepared and vulnerable, with Sammaster's first strike of silver fire wounding her before she could react. Though she had not expected or wanted conflict, a battle would ensue nonetheless. Alustriel continued her attempts at reason even as the arcane assault continued, but this only fed the flames of Sammaster's growing resentment and this distorted hatred that he now harbored. Faced with no other option, Illustriel was forced to call upon two other Chosen to aid her, the Lady Blackstaff, Laeral Silverhand, and the Lord of Summerstag, Elminster Amar. Sammaster would be defeated and nearly found his death in the battle. The trio of victorious Chosen then called Azuth. Upon arrival, the patron of arcane wizards stripped Sammaster of his chosen status and powers in the name of Mystra. The lore paints a visual scene for us, whereby a star of pure silver descended from the skies above to rest over the fallen and broken Sammaster, painfully extracting the silver fire out through his many injuries and wounds. Azuth decreed that Sammaster's body was to remain where it fell as final punishment, the lore suggesting heavily a death sentence by inaction. However, as fate would have it, after their departure, the hidden Algashan would emerge to heal Sammaster's grave wounds. The Banite priest using this moment of defeat and rescue to cement his standing as a trusted advisor, a deception that would forever destroy any remnant trace of morality left within the future first speaker. The sinister priest assured Sammaster that he was a tragic hero who had driven off the other Chosen, and that only the divine powers of the gods Azuth and Mystra had brought him defeat. Algashan then whispered his assurance that Sammaster must be a nascent god himself, destined for glory. While he had failed in the plot to steal Silver Fire, Algashan would claim a much deeper victory. With Sammaster believing himself betrayed by the light and ordained for his own divinity, he would fully embrace a new path laid before him by the Banite priest. Sammaster was now fully committed to trading the failed promises of light for the dark, eternal truth of undeath. This profound influence would provide the necessary ideological momentum for Sammaster to commence a great project of necromancy, eventually codified in writings that would come to be called the Tome of the Dragon. The 12 years in the wake of Sammaster's near death are mostly void of speculation. The lore hints this undocumented portion of Sammaster's timeline was spent yielding completely to madness and the frantic search for an infallible truth of afterlife, now guided by Algashan's thinly veiled corrupting influence in the service of Lord Bane. Stripped of his divine validation and possessed by his conviction in the lie that Mystra had betrayed him, Sammaster dedicated his immense but deluded intellect to the practice of prognostication. The traceable path of the necromancer's history would reappear in 887 DR, the year of Fell Pearls, with Sammaster's manic translation of a myriad of apocalyptic texts, a desperate search for personal meaning through the prophecies of charlatans and the insane. Foremost among these manuscripts was the work of the long-dead seer and doomsayer Maglus, specifically his undated but presumed archaic writings of omen and augury found in 4 volumes that make up the Chronicle of Years to Come. Past and present translations of these harbinger-laced texts by reputable scholars from the great archives of Candlekeep, the Vault of the Sages, and even the bardic colleges of Academia Vilhonis each concluded the writings as nothing more than another in a litany of hyperbolic works penned by biased authors, each preaching their own uniquely branded variant of end-time prophecies. However, as history has proven time and again, this written form of fortune-telling, often practiced for the sake of one's own notoriety, is far more the art of partisan interpretation than any legitimate form of science, with prophecies throughout timelines and worlds revealing a near-universal tendency to fall squarely in the realm of the self-fulfilling variety. And yet, from the alarmist fiction of these otherwise insignificant writings, Sammaster the Fallen would find his revelatory inspiration in the translation of a single heretical passage. And naught will be left save shattered thrones with no rulers, but the dead dragons shall rule the world entire. This false destiny would establish the core ideology adapted by Sammaster and the perverse new theology he would formally establish as the century turned. The fervent belief that undeath represents undying perfection, a state eternal and free from the shackles of mortal flaw. Now fully corrupted by Algashan's masterful influence, a brainwashing disguised as blessed reverence, Sammaster was not only consumed by this deluded prophecy, but convinced that only he possessed the divine wisdom to reveal such insight. And so, with Creed now firmly in place, Sammaster determined that only the immortality of a draconic lichdom, Dracoliches that would soon carry the reverent epithet of sacred ones and night dragons, were the rightful masters of Toril, and that he was ordained to serve and architect this fated destiny. It would be shortly after the turn of the century in the year of Queen's Tears 902 DR that Sammaster, guided by the right-hand council of Algashan, would establish the first formal base of operations for the Cult of the Dragon in Condathan, a city that would later be named Serlun. Condathan would prove to be ideal soil for the seeds of their undead faith, a human-dominated Symbian city-state located on the northwestern coast of the Sea of Fallen Stars. Condathan would see a constant influx of travelers to convert as an established trade hub, but was also well known for its tolerance of the exotic. Later in the same year, Sammaster would, at least in the eyes of his followers, firmly cement the cult's doctrine and validate his prophecy on the heels of an expedition into the mountains of the Thunder Peaks region. There, Sammaster would enter the lair of a great worm named Shargolar, and somehow convince that mighty but aging red dragon to submit himself to the cult's vision of immortality, a promise of eternal life offered by a vile ritual that Sammaster had dedicated almost 3 decades of his life to. Just prior to the publication of this deep dive, I carved out a prologue story lore narrative video detailing the cult's encounter with the nearly 13-century-old Great Crimson Worm that you can check out in the links in the show notes below or above you right about now. While the lore confirms that Shargolar did in fact become the cult's first successful Dracolich, that title comes with a number of caveats and clarifications. The first of which is the understanding that Shargolar was not the first to undergo the cult's ritual of draconic undeath, or even the first to have survived it, as some scholars have suggested. The truth is, not only did many dragons perish as Sammaster perfected the ritual magics, but other dragons survived but fell short of the true draconic lichdom Sammaster sought, instead becoming vampiric dragons, 2 of which I will discuss further in our bonus chapter at the end of this treatise. And 2 is to reiterate that Shargolar was the first Dracolich of the Forgotten Realms. However, he does not hold the distinction of being the OG first and original Dracolich across the entirety of the Dungeons & Dragons multiverse. That honor is reserved for a dragon that history chronicles as Dragotha, a mighty red dragon consort of Tiamat turned Dracolich, who once made its lair in the volcanic White Plume Mountain on the world of Greyhawk. Nonetheless, Shargolar, carrying the title of First Sacred One, would go on to become a powerful Dracolich, but also an icon of intimidation and belief in a doctrine of undeath. The nascent cult, now armed with the validation provided by a successful Dracolich transformation, would see rapid growth and influence, primarily gained through coercion, leveraging the terrifying threat of Shargolar at every opportunity. With the unholy alliance of Shargolar, the cult would now extort immense wealth from local caravans and noble houses across the region. Wielding the unholy might of the Dracolich, a horrified populace would witness the rapacious spread of criminal enterprise across much of the Dalelands. The lore goes on to tell us Algashan was the driving force of expansion, determined to spread the cult's influence beyond the realm's heartlands. To accomplish this, the cult would need to capitalize on the discovery and success of the undeath ritual, and it was the Priest of Bane who first urged Sammaster to organize a collection of all his wisdom, prophecies, formula, and procedures concerning the creation of night dragons, the draconic ritual of Lichdom. These writings would form the basis of the Tome of the Dragon, a book revered and held as the gospel and doctrine of followers of the Scaly Way, the scripture and prophecy of eternally serving undead dragon kings. Having established the cult and successfully creating the first Dracolich in 902, Sammaster would then begin to codify his profane theology in a collection of writings to create the Tome of the Dragon, completing the principal work just 3 years later in 905, the year of the Rotting Word. The Tome of the Dragon would serve as the definitive codex of draconic necromancy, defining the theological and practical methodology of the dragon cult for centuries to come. The provenance of this scripture is the sum of Sammaster's exhaustive research, new necromantic spells, experimental crossbreeding details, theories into metamagic, and a litany of insane prophecies and declarations. Chief among them are the conclusions concerning Dracoliches that the writing often venerates as sacred ones and night dragons, and their supposed destiny to rule all of Toril. Recognizing the necessity of spreading this malignant faith, Algashon pushed for the mass reproduction of the book, distributing copies to leaders of the many new cult cells springing up in distant towns and lands. This stroke of evil inspiration resulted in the dissemination of many lesser copies, ensuring the cult's ideology spread far and wide across the realms, with the grimoire immediately becoming the growing cult's foundational text and unholy scripture. However, it is also noted that many of these circulated copies contained varying degrees of designed error or perhaps even propaganda, with sections often revised or even omitted based on individual cells. This engineered influence would contribute directly to numerous conflicts and schisms that have plagued the cult throughout its history. The lore actually provides a number of specifics on the original work, said to be a half-foot thick tome bound in purple leather or perhaps dragon hide. However, the most important facets of the original tome lie in what is not found in its many distributed copies and the obsessive lengths that Sammaster went to protect its secrets. The original writings are said to be written in many different languages, some ancient like Thoras, and others unknown or lost to time. Yet, despite the obscure rarity of its underlying languages, the tome's pages are aggressively worded with the entire text transcribed using an advanced cipher that could not be understood even with a comprehend languages spell. This forms only one of its many barriers safeguarding the tome's secrets from those outside the cult's most trusted ranks. Beyond the various wards and the magical cipher, the tome was also protected by randomized elemental breath attacks and even uncontrolled but error-free teleportation of the reader, leaving the artifact tome behind in its wake. It is widely speculated that those secrets include the esoteric rituals and recipes required for transforming a living dragon into a Dracolich, the precise details instructing how the spirit of the dragon is anchored to a phylactery, as well as how a creature of such immense pride and elemental power can be made to serve the cult in undeath. The latter was achieved through those unknown rituals, but also via arcane-crafted tools of dominion. First among them were the Rings of the Dragons, innocuous brass bands that allowed the cult leadership to commune with and summon their undead creations across the realms. Yet, communication is not control. To shackle a dragon's formidable will required pairing the ring with a second, more powerful set of artifacts, the Amulets of Draconic Might. When worn together, these legendary items, along with the controlling magic infused in their making, stripped away the dragon's autonomy, enforcing servitude and the coercive power over the undead dragons they claimed to serve. It is said that the original Tome of the Dragon contains the hidden and encrypted schematics for crafting both, and without the original text, no new rings or amulets of such command can ever be created again, underscoring their paramount importance as the cult's source of such powerful magic of domination required to control the otherwise uncontrollable. That original tome also holds a powerful enchantment, making it indestructible, a fact that would have much relevance in the centuries to follow. Regardless of its many copies and revisions, the continued existence and teachings of the tome's nearly 600-year-old text in any form cemented the cult's unified belief that the world was fated to be ruled by undead draconic kings. That is, until it didn't. Nearly all mortals fear the turning of the page. They see the last chapter of the book of life and think, no, not yet, not while there is still ink in the well. To grasp Draconic Undeath, you must first understand flesh versus scale as they relate to the roots of Lichdom. You must appreciate the mortality of the impious man, humanoid wizards, necromancers, and others of sufficient infamy, ambition pure but cold, so much knowledge gained, always on the brink of some mastery. But time is running out, bones ache, breath comes short. Mortality for mankind is not a gentle decline, it taunts your imminent demise, death mocking your failing body. So comes the embrace of a final, darkest of art, of secrets locked behind heretical doors, bargains or pacts from pagan powers, an unholy sponsorship to unbind the pages, to live, to unlive in the margins. This is the first origin of immortality in Undeath, the genesis of the humanoid lich, and one I have covered at great length across many volumes, links below. Now, look to the mighty dragon, an arrogant creature not of fleeting decades. It has watched nations rise and fall like the turning of seasons. Dragons are quite unique in that they experience no physical decline with age. There is no growing frailty of body and mind to remind you of your mortality, no constant pain, no clouding of thought, that for most mortals will progress until you welcome the relief and solace offered by the long rest of death. In fact, for dragonkind, they will be at their peak mental and physical capacity until their very last. Yet even at their mightiest, death will come for the ancient, and if the lore is to be trusted, they more often than not sense its arrival. For a creature of such hubris, the insult of this end is never welcomed. It is here that Draconic Lichdom stands apart in its distheist pragmatism, a purely arcane practice, having roots in the secrets of humanoid Lichdom but requiring no such divine worship. Unlike mortal humanoids who often turn to a host of varying gods out of fear or supplication, dragons long ago rejected such worship. The Draconic Holy Wars, fought 31 millennia ago, demonstrated their truth, that the gods were not required or even beneficial to their survival, a universal understanding that following the whims of deities nearly led the species to extinction. Though they recognized their existence, dragonkind chose apostasy, refusing to bow before any flawed or capricious patron god. But Tiamat is the dragon goddess worshipped by all chromatic dragons, I hear you say. It is true that Tiamat is a powerful goddess and mother of all chromatic dragons, embodying their shared evil nature. However, the distinction is found in the notion of worship. The psychology of the dragon, steeped in vanity and self-interest, precludes any form of devotion. Chromatic dragons acknowledge Tiamat not through traditional worship, but via a begrudging acknowledgement and fearful respect for her sovereign power. The Queen of Dragons is thus afforded cautious deference, but not genuine reverence, viewing her as a tyrannical monarch rather than a god to be bowed to. The cult of the dragon, at least in the traditions on which it was founded, approaches dragonkind as reverent kingmakers. They evangelize no gods to worship, promising instead their reign as gods to be worshipped. A covenant sealed by unlocking the immortality of a draconic-branded lichdom based on pure arcane theory and art rather than the divine. And it is the necromantic powers harnessed by Sammaster that became the Gnostic connective tissue that makes this vow of eternal rule and philosophical independence so convincing to an evil dragon that believes a void of nothing is the only alternative. The Draconic Lichdom process starts with sophisticated intelligence gathering to identify dragons facing some form of existential crises. Those who had suffered near-fatal defeats, witnessed the rise of younger rivals, experienced the gradual erosion of their territorial dominance, or in many cases, simply sensing their own lifespan coming to a close, a common attribute of dragon anatomy. The manipulation is an arduous, patient, and potentially very dangerous enterprise, given the need to dismantle a dragon's immense arrogance in favor of submitting to mortals they otherwise deem as lesser and insignificant. The sales pitch aims to amplify this fear of mortality to a species that long ago abandoned belief in an afterlife, while preaching the glorious destiny the prophecy proclaims awaits them. The methodology of bridging the liminal space between apotheosis and immortality requires three fundamental components: the elixir of desecration, often called the Dracolich brew, the phylactery, and the dark arcane rituals that will bind the draconic soul into undeath. However, despite the removal of any divine sponsorship, the transformation is not as simple as drinking a potion and casting a spell. The ritual of undeath is a complex, multi-stage ritual that spans many days and is represented by advanced necromantic theory and alchemical craft. The dragon's essence must first be anchored to the phylactery. This artifact must be a solid, non-decaying item valued at no less than 2,000 pieces of gold. Unlike the humanoid version of Lichdom, this phylactery almost always takes the form of a gemstone. While the known texts do not specifically state that a gemstone is a hard requirement, this may just be an oversight, as the lengthy preparation of this soul vessel often includes the mastery of precision gem cutting among its requirements. Regardless, gemstones are common enough that the phylactery is often alternatively referred to as a soul hoard gem. As mentioned, the arcane process required just to properly imbue the phylactery is lengthy, stated to take 10 consecutive days of error-free rituals and intensive magical crafting, making the phylactery impossible to create concurrently with the elixir of desecration that is also required for the second step of the process. The elixir of desecration constitutes the transformation's lethal physical catalyst in liquid form. While the exact recipe is a highly guarded secret, the lore does provide some important information. For example, we know that the alchemical composition consists exactly of 7 ingredients that vary by dragon type and age. Just some of the known components include pure arsenic, belladonna, and fresh vampire blood with a best buy expiration of only 7 days. This deadly tonic then needs to be stirred under the baleful light of a full moon for 3 nights, and there are texts that insist that a sacrificed humanoid heart must be used as the mixing vessel. If created properly, the elixir provides instant death while preserving the dragon's corpse from decay and priming the soul for the incoming transfer. Yet, while this sounds as methodical as science, in truth the practice is fraught with much risk and peril, and success is never guaranteed. The rare and, dare I say, unreliable historical records betray a success rate as low as 50%, with a grim 10% chance that the potion fails entirely, resulting in immediate and unrecoverable death of the dragon. A bit of fine print that is likely never disclosed in full to the candidate dragon. Assuming you have successfully completed the phylactery, the elixir, and the dragon hasn't come to its senses in the almost 2 weeks that have now elapsed, then and only then can the final rite of undeath begin. In the unholy ceremony to follow, a dedicated group of cultists begin to perform the necessary incantations as the hopeful dragon consumes the lethal draft. But unknown to the dragon are a few undisclosed properties of that Dracolich brew. In addition to the stated death and preservation properties, the elixir is also laced with subtle arcane elements of control. These powerful magics of draconic servitude can also be amplified by the amulets of draconic might, all meant to secure a measure of final, permanent leverage over dragons that were, in life, uncontrollable by most mortal hands. Upon the dragon's consumption and subsequent death, the attending wizards continue the ritual while touching the deceased host, transferring the dragon's essence to the phylactery. As the ritual of undeath advances, the extracted and now imprisoned dragon's soul can then be placed back within its former body. Although there are very rare accounts of some fascinating procedures for a dragon soul possessing a body other than its original. These include placing the soul in a reptilian corpse of any size, where it enters a temporary state as a proto-Dracolich. This limited undead form does retain the original mind and memories of the dragon, but it is stripped of voice, spells, and its breath weapon. To then achieve full Dracolichdom, the proto-Dracolich must subsequently seek out and devour at least 10% of its original body mass over 7 days in order to complete the metamorphosis. Should the ritual go as planned with the final incantation spoken, the great beast rises again, reborn in undeath. But the beast that is now awoken is not the majestic creature that slumbered in death. When the eyes of the Dracolich open, they no longer burn with an inner fire of the living. They glow with the impious, pale witchlight of the grave. The mighty heart that once pumped elemental fury through its veins is now silent. The wind under its wings, the warmth of the sun on its scales, and the taste of fresh prey are no more, replaced by a numbing, eternal cold. The dragon has traded the regal vibrancy of life for the calcifying sterility of permanence. The cult has not given them a crown, but a collar. For all their arrogance, the dragon has simply traded the fear of mortality for an eternity of servitude, a soul shackled with varying degrees of success to the whims of the cult. It is a tragedy of epic story and song, arguably the realm's most independent and strong-willed apex predator, now transformed into a puppet of scorn, bone, and decay, a promise of immortality sealed in gemstone. Yet for all his mastery over undeath, its mastermind remained bound by that which he sought to conquer. Sammaster was still very much mortal, and mortality, as history would soon prove, is a debt that always comes due. In the year of the Sinhala, 916 DR, Sammaster and a contingent of draconic and undead hybrids were en route to the southern edge of Cormanthor to court a pair of dragons into Lichdom. These ancient green dragons held control of a large swath of the region from Featherdale to the Dun Hills, and Sammaster was eager to convince them into accepting the promise of undeath. However, agents from the Confederation of Realms Protectors, known as the Harpers, had learned of the cult's activities in advance. Joining forces with a group of Lathanderites, they tracked down and ambushed the Archmage and his entourage just outside the small village of Hap, located at the base of a long, dormant volcano called Haptooth Hill. The Harper ambush would commence on an early spring dawn. The ensuing battle between the cult and the Harpers raged for a full day and night, with heavy losses on both sides. However, none could reach Sammaster, and as the sun set, the fallen Chosen of Mystra emerged atop a Dracolich, commanding creatures both undead and born from other foul experiments, many of which the Harpers had never seen before. Despite the Harpers' element of surprise, the tides of battle had begun to turn in the dragon cult's favor. It would be, when all seemed lost, that a host of Lathanderite priests appealed to their deity in desperate prayer, pleading for divine aid to stop the impious forces of the Mad Mage. Lathander heard their prayers. In response, the Morning Lord sent an avatar to defend the Harpers in battle. While the lore is unclear on the exact manifestation of this avatar, it is reasonable to include a Monitor as one possibility. The undead protecting Sammaster were disintegrated in a flash of celestial light, the clouds of charred ash darkening the battlefield as the full glory of the Morning Lord touched them. Sammaster's Dracolich steed vomited forth a massive stream of dragon fire, the infernal-consuming Harpers and Lathanderite priests, before searing the golden armor of the Morning Lord. But that would be the undead beast's last act, as the holy avatar's celestial mace, Dawnspeaker, obliterated the head of the wailing dragon, the weapon's heavenly power forever disrupting the Dracolich's unliving existence. Sammaster's reaction was a disturbing calm, as the seemingly untroubled arch-necromage floated mid-air where his steed fell. A split second later, Sammaster summoned an aura of ineffable blackness to cloak his body. His eyes glowed of dark intent as he raised his staff. The necromancer then summoned a mighty turning wheel, and from it, ethereal tendrils began to emerge. The lore will tell us that all but Sammaster and the Avatar were held motionless, a battlefield now frozen of action. But all felt the presence of something that day, some great evil waiting just beyond. As the dread moment of arrival was imminent, the avatar of Lathander let loose a divine battle cry as cracking streams of lightning and golden radiance burst from his eyes, ripping through the arcane wheel and striking Sammaster, the necromancer's skeletal frame flashing from under his robes and flesh for a brief moment, his body convulsing uncontrollably. Sammaster, seemingly in the throes of his own death, reached up and drew forth a single thin sheet of silvery metal, engraved with strange runic symbols and glyphs across its surface. Sammaster held it up before him as if to force the avatar to read it, just as the divine mace Dawnspeaker tore through the metallic scroll, shattering it into countless razor-like shards, cutting both Sammaster and the Morning Lord avatar. Legends posit that from the wounded Morning Lord fell 4 drops of divine blood, each carefully collected by the priests of Lathander. This celestial life force would later be suspended in amber to become the minor artifact known as the Blood of Lathander. Nonetheless, the Morning Lord avatar then called upon the power of a divine sunbeam to engulf the necromancer, his shadowy dark aura diffusing instantly against the immense light. Sammaster, the powerful necromantic archmage whose stability and judgment Mystra had so underestimated, was reduced to 2 pounds of fine ash, incinerated in the sun's fire. But for a necromancer of his genius, is death truly an end or merely an inconvenient delay? As the lore would unravel, his death would fail to herald the end of the cult or even provide the finality of the necromancer that the Harpers desired. However, the epic conflict would alter the history of the cult and would provide a centuries-long respite from the plots of the first speaker. The fire of the Morning Lord left nothing but silence and dust. To the weary Harpers and the bloodied priests of Lathander, the victory must have felt like a definitive end. They believed the first speaker was destroyed, his threat extinguished by the direct intervention of a god. However, they were very wrong. Undeniably defeated, the death of Sammaster's mortal form in the Dalelands would provide only temporary serenity from the Archmage of the Undead. As would any competent necromancer, the first speaker had long ago prepared for such a contingency, his soul essence traveling to a hidden and awaiting phylactery. And we, of course, have to stop right there, because as many of you veteran lore scholars have no doubt already questioned, we must now address what is an obvious conflict in the rules of Undeath as we know and understand them. For those unaware, that divine obliteration of a mortal Sammaster in 916, a necromancer turned into a pile of ash, most certainly should have marked his permanent end, at least by the known canonical rules of Lichdom. How did Sammaster cheat the Morning Lord and death itself? You see, no matter how accomplished of a mortal necromancer you are still mortal. That is, until you are not. But the known rules of Undeath require completing the formal process of Lichdom, by which all accounts of the known lore, Sammaster had not. So Sammaster was, at this time, canonically still a living, flesh and blood mortal. And mortals aren't granted access to the gifts of Undeath, most critically the immortality of extra lives afforded by the properties of a Lich's phylactery. So this is a clear conflict in the lore, right? On the surface, it would most certainly seem so. However, if you really dig deep, which I have, I'm happy to report that we are rewarded with some stellar lore crafting by the authors of the 2nd edition text. The Cult of the Dragon sourcebook provides us only a somewhat vague explanation, telling us that Sammaster had so devoted his life to the study of necromancy that he was able to cast a series of linked ritual spells, a sort of chain contingency, along with the creation of a phylactery. Prepared in advance, this impious magic would trigger in the event of his death, thus beginning Sammaster's own undeath transformation into Lichdom. Now, let's be honest, that is a generous amount of Deus Ex magical hand-waving, and if that was all the explanation we were given in the lore, it would be a mostly valid, but still far less than satisfactory answer. Thankfully, that is not all the lore we are given. Dragon Magazine number 110 provides a plausible foundation for any world builder to remind us that before Sammaster was a mad prophet, he was a student prodigy, then a powerful archmage, and eventually a chosen of the goddess Mystra. And as a chosen of Mystra, Sammaster spent 3 seasons under the guidance of the Sage of Shadowdale himself, Elminster Amar. This is important because Dragon 110 details Elminster's creation of a custom variant of the contingency spell that the old wizard named Elminster's Evasion. It was a masterpiece of arcane survival, a custom contingency designed to snatch the caster's soul and body from the clutches of death, whisking them across planes to a prepared sanctuary. Elminster going so far as to canonically call his spellcraft a true alternative to Lichdom. This spell allowed the caster to set a maximum of 6 conditions or contingencies by which this custom-crafted spell would fire, and when it did, quote, the caster's soul or spirit, even if separated from the body, and all physical items worn, held, or attached, is instantly snatched through a world walk portal to a place chosen by the caster, even if that place is many planes distant, and its arrival there will trigger 2 previously cast spells of any level, end quote. Sammaster, having served under Elminster for those 3 years, starting in 851 DR, could have easily learned Elminster's Evasion, and it is not only plausible but almost certain that in the 65 years that followed, would have used his own formidable necromantic and arcane prowess to deconstruct and revise the spell to craft an unholy variant. This claim is only further bolstered by neatly aligning to Sammaster's established lore in deconstructing the mechanics of the weave that drew Mystra's attention to him in the first place. All adding credibility to a scenario whereby the necromancer, through perversion and abuse of Elminster's elegant arcane art, achieved what should have been impossible, dying as a mortal, yet his soul remaining unclaimed by the fugue plane. Instead, his essence being redirected to his diamond phylactery in waiting, located in a designated and prepared secret cache, all part of Sammaster's in case of death break glass contingency, effectively brute forcing the transition into Lichdom post-mortem. The cache contained not only the Soul Hoard Gem phylactery and the ash of his remains, but the original indestructible Tome of the Dragon. Inside were explicit instructions for a loyal follower and half-elf thief named Zotula to establish a new cell near the lair of the Dracolich Shargrilar in the region of Cormyr, and then perform the Lichdom rituals required to bind the founder's soul into a new host. At some point between 916 and 918 DR, Zotula, as instructed, would establish a new cell just north of a small city that later maps would call Tilverton, deep in the Desert's Mouth Mountains. But fate, it seems, is not without its own sense of irony. Long before the Lichdom ritual of resurrection was even started, the sanctuary would be discovered. Forces from Gentel Keep, cult rivals in the trade of opposition and tyranny, overran the hideout, butchering each and every cultist they found. But Zotula, possessing the slippery luck of a thief, managed to evade the slaughter, escaping with the all-important tome and the rough diamond phylactery. He fled into the high peaks before his luck ran out, avoiding the Zhentarim, only to run straight into the blades of an orc war party. Zotula died alone in the snow. The orcs, ignorant of the true power of the artifacts they now possessed, saw only a cloudy, semi-valuable gemstone and a heavy book they could not read, or as it turned out, destroy. And so the soul of Sammaster, the man who would be a god, was unceremoniously tossed into a sack of plunder, traded among tribes of primitives, passed from chieftain to shaman for over 3 centuries. A prisoner of his own making, trapped in a cloudy rock, waiting for a hand curious and wise enough to polish the stone. In the course of chronicling any history that spans decades or centuries, one inevitably encounters texts of dubious origin and veracity. We usually call these retcons, and while they are common and sometimes even necessary, there are, on rare occasion, some which are so misguided they have no place inside established canon. And in the case of Sammaster's 3-century gap, such a void in the villain's timeline would invite appropriation by a real-world cult for some sinister meta-lore. These very recent retcons that can only be generously called apocryphal texts, or more accurately, outright lies, claim Sammaster spent this nearly 4-century interregnum reborn and killed again on a never-before-seen world named Adenthia, lore that you will never find in any sourcebook, adventure module, or novel. However, in this deep dive, we are going to categorically ignore each of these lies, and I only mention them here as a matter of completeness. Why? Well, integrity. This narrative lore detour originates solely from the digital abyss of a WotC-licensed Chinese mobile play-to-win gacha game, a realm of loot boxes, pay-to-win mechanics, and lazy retcons that one can only guess was WotC looking to ride the Raid Shadow Legends whale train, but hey, that's just my opinion. However, since I am a scholar of lore and not a shareholder of predatory monetization, we will treat this content with the same respect Sammaster treated the laws of nature, which is to say, it doesn't exist. While it would probably have been prudent to just avoid this controversy altogether, in the same way everyone should avoid its lore, I do feel obligated to call out such disrespect for the history and lore of the game I love. Oh, and I almost forgot the worst part. In this unmentionable game world, Tiamat now has 3 heads. I wish I was kidding. So I implore you to excise this cash grab aberration from the lore record and speak of it no more, all of which will gain me no friends or sponsorships from WotC anytime soon, so yeah, please like and subscribe, I guess. In the void left by the first speaker's death, the Cult of the Dragon would find new leadership, but also theological erosion. It would be in this era that Algashan's manipulation, foreshadowed since their meeting outside Baldur's Gate on the Sword Coast all the way back in 865 DR, would yield the fruits of his betrayal. The chronicles noting that Algashan had prior knowledge of the Harper ambush that claimed Sammaster's physical form in 916. However, instead of warning Sammaster, the Banite priest had prepared to be far away from the scene. The intent should be obvious, but just in case it's not, we also discover that Algashan had arranged for Sammaster to send his greatest Dracolich, Shar-Grelar, off on some undocumented task located far across the realms. A move that both removed the Night Dragon from any danger posed by the Harper ambush, but most importantly for Algashan's treachery, preventing the powerful Dracolich, loyal to the first speaker, from tipping the scales of battle in favor of Sammaster. The subsequent fall of the cult's founder now allowed Algashan to fully take control of the organization. Under the priest's leadership, the dragon cult would adopt a new hierarchical structure for himself and his council of leaders, now called the Wearers of Purple, a title that would become synonymous with the cult moving forward. Now free from his feigned sycophancy to Sammaster, Algashan shed his guise as a strident believer in the first speaker's prophecy. A true mask-off moment witnessed by followers as the Banite priest immediately set out to significantly alter the philosophical motivations and goals of the cult. Of course, not all saw this dramatic change in doctrine as positive, resulting in the formation of a great schism that would define the cult's internal politics for centuries to come. In many ways, this was no longer even a theological debate. It was a fundamental divide that, for some, no longer involved belief or dogma. On one side stood the purists, traditionalist true believers in Sammaster's prophecy of draconic rule. To them, the Dracolich was a sacred state, and service to these future undying kings was a divine calling. At the other end of the spectrum were a new wave of followers, pragmatists, recruited by Algashan's vision and now the faction in power under his leadership. This radical departure from Sammaster's established and original gospel exposed a universal truth found in nearly all cults, that at its core the vast majority of followers fall into one of 2 categories: those purists, the fervent extremists, fanatical and ardent true believers in a cause, and the pragmatists, those who ambitiously use the organization as a vehicle to acquire the far more secular goals of infamy, influence, power, and wealth. all under the religious cloak of false idolatry and veneration. For Algashan's group of pragmatists, Dracoliches were not gods to be worshipped at all, only weapons to be wielded, controlled, and leveraged in order to achieve their nefarious goals. Behind the Black Hand doctrine of Lord Bane, the second half of the 10th century would mark a period of renewed aggression by the cult. Despite the clear ideological divide formed in the wake of Sammaster's death, history would still note this era as the zenith of the dragon cult's expansion across the realms, surpassing 100 known operating cells by 950 DR. Following the cult's defeat in Cirque, the city of lizards on the northern shores of the Deepwash Lake in the Vilhan Reach by the Church of Tiamat in 971 DR, the growing internal dissent within the cult would finally be given voice in late 972. The rise of the purist faction would be championed by a wearer of purple named Tulhava Drakewings, a potent archmage who fiercely opposed the cult's Baneite direction under Algashan. Drakewings and his cohort of purists sought a return to the cult's core prophecy, openly rejecting the idea of subordinate status for the Sacred Ones in favor of an agenda driven by the Lord of Tyranny. The simmering tension of internal strife and open skirmishes escalated slowly over several decades, but would be amplified in the Year of the Awakening, 1001 DR, after Tulhava traveled to the city of Pelaverin, located in the Shar region, to follow up on rumors of an ancient undead dragon lurking somewhere deep below the city. The Archmage was looking for a draconic savior for his faction. Instead, he found a devil. Deep in the city's catacombs, bound in a pit by ancient Netherese magic, was Gargoth. A former archdevil, the 10th Lord of the Nine was an exile from the Nine Hells with a silver tongue and a heart of absolute corruption. If that name sounds familiar, Gargoth was once, before his banishment from the Nine Hells, the treasurer of Asmodeus. The fiend is also notable as being the evil apparition who became trapped in the Shield of the Hidden Lord that you likely encountered in the text of the Descent to Avernus adventure module. Tulhalva stared into the black depths of the fiend's prison as the lost lord of the pit made the wearer of purple an offer. The devil learned of Tulhalva's mission, sympathizing with his plight and promising significant aid in his cause if freed. Having secured a fiendish bargain, the Archmage took up residence in the city and for the next 17 years labored under the whispered guidance and direction of Gargoth, crafting powerful rituals and spells to sever his bindings. The efforts of the Archmage would culminate in 1018 DR, the year of the Dracorage, when the devil's shackles were finally broken. Gargoth emerged, and true to the infernal terms of their agreement, the Archdevil paid his debt by granting Tulhava command of an army of hellspawn Abishai devils. Tulhava called to his faction of the cult and bid them to join him in the formation of a new cell operating outside of Algashan's control. With the support of the fiendish legion of draconic devils, the purist faction easily conquered Pelaverin. However, as any competent infernal scholar is well aware, striking fiendish bargains are the epitome of risk, rarely resulting in an equitable transaction. Tulhalva might have done well to research the Hidden Lord in advance. You see, despite a charming facade of intellectual sophistication, Gargoth is at his core a foul and sagacious master of trickery and corruption. The fiendish exile, so infamous for his manipulative nature that even the archdevils of the Nine Hells found him a bit too mendacious. True to his fiendish portfolio that highlights betrayal and political corruption, there was no chance that Gargoth would pass on the opportunity to spill some tea, causing unrest on a realm-wide scale. Now freed from captivity, Gargoth made his way to Symbia, home of the dragon cult headquarters under Algashan's leadership, to enact his betrayal. Disguised as a frail old man, the fiend sparked outrage against Tulhava's faction, stoking the flames of war with the grand lie that Pelaverin was conquered by slaying an ancient undead dragon king. In response to such blasphemous rebellion, Algashon rallied the full might of the Symbian cult, 20 archmages, along with a contingent of priests, mercenaries, and every dragon and Dracolich he could muster, marching to the eastern edge of the fire-steeped mountains and the city of Faerun, intent on eliminating Tulhava and his heretical rogue cultists. The battle that followed saw the diametrically opposed ideologies clash violently until blood ran pale on both sides. The skies over Faerun turned crimson with dragonfire and spilled blood, and in the center of this inferno, the two architects of this schism each met their end. Tulhalva and the majority of the Faerun cell were defeated and slain, but the cost was great, seeing Algashon die in the battle as well. The aftermath of the orchestrated conflict would have devastating and far-reaching impacts. When the smoke cleared, Faerun was wiped from the realm's map. And as the driving force of the cult's tyrannical worship of Bane, Algashon's death in particular marked the end of the Baneite movement within. To call Gargoth's manufactured chaos a success was an understatement. With the demise of the cult's two strongest leaders as well as a significant number of archmages holding the title of Wearers of Purple, the entire organization was left decimated. Yet while remnant followers scrambled and schemed to fill the immense power vacuum, for true believers, the soul of the cult, Sammaster's original prophecy, still remained. Scattered and leaderless, these purists now clung to a single, desperate hope, fanning the embers of their faith. And so they waited. They would rebuild, and they would pray for the spark that would one day see their founder rise again. Following Sammaster's death in 916 DR, the faction of followers still dedicated to its founder patiently waited a renewal of purpose, their faith sustained by the promise of their founder's return. It would be a very long wait. 366 years would pass until the Year of Many Mists, 1282 DR, would chronicle the return of Sammaster, arising from high in the Desert's Mouth Mountains near Shadowgap. As word traveled, many across the realms doubted the true identity of the Lich. Still, the surviving faction of purists rallied around the miraculous return of the first speaker. The Lich Lord would then begin to assemble a motley army of dragons, undead, and human zealots, all under his banner. There exist a few theories on the mechanism that would bring forth Sammaster's resurrection into Lichdom, that final step to complete the powerful contingency spell we detailed back in Chapter 13. The lore is properly vague, as it should be, but there are many scholars who forward the deciphered ritual theory, positing the reasonable conclusion that in the preceding 3 centuries, the first speaker's phylactery and Tome of the Dragon finally found hands with the curiosity as well as the knowledge to decipher the centuries-old instructions of undeath. Unfortunately for the reborn Lich Lord, the second reign of Sammaster would prove brief, spanning only 3 chaotic years. The spreading of speculation and rumor is never selective. News of the first speaker's return would make its way across the realms, not only finding his loyal followers, but soon after falling upon the ears of a zealous band of paladins known as the Company of 12. Seeking their own holy crusade and supported by the persistent efforts of the cult's sworn enemy, the Harpers, in the year of the Black Snake, 1285 DR, the Company of 12 would assault Sammaster's fortress, an ancient ruin grimly remembered as Harrow's Mouth. The ensuing confrontation claimed the lives of 9 of those crusading paladins, yet the remaining holy warriors were able to slay the Lich's physical form and confirm to the realm's history books that this was indeed the return of Sammaster. Now, the lore does not offer any details on exactly how the paladins verified the Lich as being Sammaster, given that neither the Tome of the Dragon or the first speaker's phylactery were recovered by the forces of light. Not only does this at least beg questions about their identification process, but more importantly meant that only the Lich's soul was exiled, still capable of returning at some point in the future. With Sammaster once again defeated, it was reasonable for both followers and scholars of the age to question if the first speaker was forever destroyed with no hope of resurrection. In the near century that followed, several apocryphal tales and rumor would arise, suggesting that current leaders of the Symbian cell had been overheard to say that Sammaster's remains lie undisturbed in some, quote, forgotten tomb, perhaps below Harrow's Mouth. The consensus opinion among historians and sages of the time was that these remarks were most likely accurate, though one must consider the bias of their source. What was known at the time was that no being, alive or dead, had offered a credible claim of Sammaster's return as of the first half of the 14th century. And while this may provide weight to the conclusion that the mad prophet was forever and truly destroyed, one must remember that Sammaster existed inside his phylactery for more than 3 centuries before his reappearance in 1282. The final word of 13th century sages, as documented in the 2nd edition text of the Cult of the Dragon sourcebook, offered 3 theories. The first was that Sammaster was forever dead, his spirit passed on to the plains, likely the city of strife in Oinos on the Grey Waste, or possibly to some other plains such as Avalis and Acheron, where a former citadel of Bane was located. The second would posit that the Mad Mage's psyche again rests within the lost diamond phylactery, awaiting another chance to return to the realms as a vastly powerful lich once again. Sammaster being, quote, dust in a long-forgotten tomb from the aforementioned cultist rumors, possibly indicating his form has evolved to that of a demi-lich. A third, final theory would offer a caution to consider as theory, that it would not be beyond Sammaster's immense capabilities to bring himself back not as a humanoid lich, but rather as a mighty Dracolich. And so, with the first speaker's fate still unclear and the cult on the brink of entering another period of change, these theories would simmer for nearly a century, until that question would be answered 87 years later. The decades following Sammaster's brief return as a lich and second death would see the still mostly fractured cult emerge from the underground, attempting to re-establish a presence of realm's influence by way of several notable events. The first of these saw the Symbian cell, now operating out of Serloon, engaged in an open clash with the Symbian military in an event history would label the Battle of the River Rising in 1340. Although defeated, this aggression demonstrated a change in the cult's previously covert demeanor and their capacity for deception and violence. In 1357 DR, their quest for power led them to pursue a young daleswoman named Chandril Cheshire, hoping to harness her innate command of spellfire. This high-stakes chase dragged them across faerun, pitting them against the Zhentarim, the Knights of Mithranor, and even several of the Seven Sisters. The ambition of the dragon cultists was matched only by the price of their failure. In their pursuit, they lost not 1, but 3 Dracoliches that I will expand on in the bonus Dracolich chapter at the end of this discovery. This not insignificant setback, however, would not halt the cult's pattern of hubris. 4 of the cult's archmages launched a brazen assault on Silvery Moon, seeking to draw out Alastriel Silverhand, a lingering obsession one can assume held strong ties to their founder's past. The cult wizards and their Dracolich nearly breached the city's defenses before being repelled by the combined might of Alastriel, her sister Leral, and Lord Blackstaff, Kelvin Aronson. Even in defeat, however, the battle was a stark reminder of the cult's growing aggression and audacity. Yet for many of the cult's failures, there were also successes, noted in the cult's transformation of an elder topaz gem dragon, Itharog, in 1364, and a year later convincing the very old blue dragon, Malagris, to also embrace undeath. Malagris in particular would yield immediate benefit to the cult. The risen dragon of Undeath soon destroyed his chief rival and seized control of approximately 20 blue dragons inhabiting Anarok, handing the cult significant influence over a score of powerful blue worms. This era also saw the cult embroiled in underworld conflicts, openly warring with the Zhentarim for control of trade routes, proving their focus was still as much on gold and influence as it was on prophecy. Other cells launched their own schemes, such as cult leader Kaya Mordrain, who in the year of the Gauntlet 1369 attempted to seize power in Myth Draenor. Aided by a Dracolich named Pelendralar, Kaya used the Pools of Radiance to corrupt a Mythal, and then swarm the ruins with cultists and undead. The power of the Mythal creating a twisted army of dragonkin that the lore would come to call Scarred Ones. The events to follow would be chronicled in both the adventure and video game Pools of Radiance. The dragon cult's aggression carried forward to the year of wild magic 1372 when the Symbian Cell discovered the Well of Dragons, an ancient draconic graveyard in an extinct volcanic caldera and a site of immense latent power, which they quickly claimed and fortified as the territory for a cult cell appropriately named the Dragon Well. It was around the time of this discovery that the world would see the final return of the Mad Prophet. Sammaster, resurrected as a lich once again, would attempt the unification of the cult he founded by perverting a legendary elven artifact I have already covered extensively, known as the Dracorage Mythal. His search would begin with the acquisition of dark secrets drowned beneath the cold waters of the Moonsea. Founded by survivors from the fall of Netheril over a millennia past in the year of the Dagger 348, Northkeep holds the distinction of being the first human settlement on the Moonsea. However, its rise and fall would barely eclipse a half-century, as the coastal citadel would be invaded in 400 DR by a malevolent non-human alliance out of the Great Grey Land, Thar. The lore suggests this dark force exceeded 40,000 strong, led by the black worm Lyroloth. This annihilation of Northkeep plunged the city to the bottom of the Moonsea, its ruins left to forever haunt a watery grave where phantom bells toll in the deep. Still driven by lifelong obsession and the deluded certainty of his end-times prophecy of undead dragon rule, Sammaster would descend into this sorrowful abyss, bypassing blinding phantom defenders seeking to locate the long-lost artifact of dragon psychosis. In those tragic remnants deep below the waves, the resurrected first speaker would search the rotting pulp of the ruins' submerged libraries, but ultimately finding the knowledge he sought etched on marble slabs fixed to the sunken city's crumbling walls. These carvings would yield the nexus and original elven high magic used to create the Mythal, leading Sammaster to the northernmost reaches of faerun and a large frozen landmass called Pelvuria, better known as the Great Glacier. Hidden in a jagged tundra valley prowled by at least one ghost dragon, the Lich would locate a warded citadel of ice and stone, its foundation littered with countless bones of dragons and ancient winged Avariel elves. Inside, a single portal led to an inner sanctum with smooth black walls and an intricate silver arcane symbol inlaid onto the floor. The chamber's black ceiling depicting in vibrant gemstones the streaking crimson star that so terrified all of dragonkind. At the center of this arcane consecrated chamber lie the heart of that ancient elven high magic artifact, first used to shatter the dominion of dragon rule in an era now 25,000 years past. This was the Mythal's capstone, responsible for the mind-poisoning Dracorage curse of unchecked bloodlust that nearly drove the worms to self-destruction, accomplished by harnessing the power of the King-Killer Star. Sammaster applied the knowledge gathered in the sunken ruins of Northkeep to dissect and bypass the Mythal's original mechanism and design, keyed to incite dragon frenzy only upon the appearance of the Red Comet. While the last true Dracorage occurred in 1018 DR, Sammaster sought to sever the celestial link that activated the Mythal and replace it with a permanent, self-sustaining and world-spanning Dragon Rage, decoupled and independent of the King-Killer Star. To accomplish this, the Lich used his immense powers of necromancy to bind his phylactery directly to the artifact's capstone. In doing so, Sammaster was able to leverage the uncontrollable dragon rage to recruit a host of chromatic dragons, forcing each to choose undeath or psychosis. Faced with the prospect of such intractable fury, many submitted to Dracolichdom, offering its immunity to the Mythal's curse and in return creating an undying draconic army at Sammaster's command. The end of Sammaster's long-sought ambition arrived in 1373, the year of rogue dragons, at the hands of a small union of reluctant heroes, consisting of a halfling rogue, a cleric, and a song dragon, whose own mind was afflicted by the very frenzy they sought to halt. The group was led by a half-golem warrior named Dorn Greybrook, whose own origin story of trauma and parental loss at the hands of a red dragon fostered in the young boy a great animus toward all dragons that would carry into adulthood. The heroes were soon joined by a growing coalition of metallic dragons and other mortal heroes to confront the Witch King Sammaster in the northern extremes of Faerun. There, Sammaster revealed his terrifying new powers and perhaps accomplishing one of his understated lifelong goals, himself taking the form of a colossal Dracolich, capable of summoning and commanding hellfire worms and pyroclastic dragons. In the epic and final engagement, the heroes would prevail, and in a nod to the ironic, Sammaster's death would, for the second time, take the form of divine light from the Morning Lord, this time delivered in sacrifice by the Lathanderite cleric Pavel Shemov. His channeling burst of celestial sunlight striking down the Lich and obliterating his tethered soul horde gem. With the phylactery's destruction, Sammaster's spirit finally met its forever death. In the aftermath, the rage of dragons abated immediately, its tainted source, like Sammaster's soul, eternally silenced. The final death of Sammaster and the void left by his centralizing presence would once again place the cult he founded in turmoil as dozens of cells collapsed and several others attempted to seize power, all while growing threats from the Church of Tiamat sought to absorb the cult under the reign of the chromatic Dragon Queen. While we will expand on the undead Draconic dossier a bit later in our bonus chapter, it is vital to understand that the cult would see significant change to its stewardship in this era, no longer led by purple-robed zealots alone, with a collective triad taking their turn holding the reins of command. This change began as the great bone worm Alasglur Banbastos tried to unite the various fractured cells under his leadership. But as the 3rd edition text found in the excellent Dragons of Faerun sourcebook clearly point out, his allegiance to the Church of Tiamat became a strong point of contention working against his efforts. In the wake of the Great Bone Worm's bid for leadership, the cult would find a tenuous alliance formed between two Dracoliches and a humanoid lich, known at the time only as the First Interpreter. History would later reveal this mysterious lich was in fact the resurrected form of Algashan Nathair. Joining the Banite Lich in this ruling council that would come to be known as the Triumvirate was a shadow Dracolich known as Orglor Oasa, the Sibilant Shade, and a black great worm rapacious Dracolich known as Dorgothoth, the Creeping Doom. This Triumvirate would rule for decades. However, this would be disrupted along with all the Forgotten Realms and even the Realms Lore timeline, forever fragmented by the effects of the Spell Plague, a critical, if often criticized event resulting in a calendar void that would fast forward nearly 100 years. That lost century and the Spell Plague itself have far-reaching impacts up and down the timeline and should not be trivialized. I've done multiple deep dive volumes on the effects of the Spell Plague, which I've linked in the show notes and should appear in the upper corner right about now. That said, the pages of history would emerge from the wake of that blue storm in the late 15th century, the year of the Ageless One, 1479. Rising to hold at least symbolic authority with the dragon cult was a rune-scribed Dracolich named Anabraxis the Black Talon. Although not recognized as the cult's official leader, Anabraxis was revered among the cult, the lore telling us the mighty night dragon directed the cult in thought from a deep slumber. And it would be just a few short years before the cult saw its leadership and direction violently overthrown in the early 1480s, when the Red Dragon worm speaker and devout follower of Tiamat, Severin Silrajan, took control. Severin would use a heretical proclamation to usher in the most significant change in the history of the Cult of the Dragon. And it is here that we must pause for a moment to reflect upon what is the single most impactful use of punctuation in all of Realm's lore. A simple modification found in the translation of the very same text upon which Sammaster founded the Cult of the Dragon so many centuries ago. And naught will be left save shattered thrones, with no rulers but the dead. Dragons shall rule the world entire. A shift in a centuries-old ideology resting entirely upon the subtle movement of a period and the addition of a comma. Was this a self-serving perversion of the first speaker's prophecy, or the correction of a misguided translation by a mad prophet? Or perhaps both? That I will leave up to each of you. Nonetheless, this, combined with Severin's strong influence, changed the cult's foundational creed, mandating the rule of living dragons and their goddess, queen, and mother, Tiamat, seeking to forever abandon the dogma of undeath and Dracolich supremacy. To further this new truth, the Worm Speaker would forge an alliance with the Red Wizards of Thay, taking his allies from Icewind Dale all the way to Turin and the lair of the Red Dragon Lostmoth, seeking to retrieve and assemble the legendary powers of the 5 dragon masks and amass a treasure hoard worthy of Tiamat. These historic events would culminate in 1489 with an attempt to summon Tiamat from Avernus to the Well of Dragons, the apocalyptic bid for power chronicled in the Tyranny of Dragons storyline for the 5th edition text. I will offer a quick pause here for the spoiler warning ahead. The Tyranny of Dragons campaign was ultimately thwarted by 5 heroic factions of faerun and their metallic dragon allies, interrupting the ritual and ensuring that Tiamat was once again banished back to the 9 Hells, but not before Severin met his own end, devoured by the great maw of the Dragon Queen. In the aftermath, the Cult of the Dragon once again became fractured along an ideological divide, one sect fervently chasing supremacy in the undeath of Lichdom, and an equal and opposite movement that sought a new era of dominance through living dragons under Tiamat's reign. With influence now faded from its zenith, the cult endures today as a splintered but still dangerous threat to the realms, finding appeal with the ambitious, unethical, and even those terrified of mortality, offering each some form of predetermined destiny, rooted in either the seductive promises of power through living dragons, or perhaps eternal life through serving undead dragon kings. To those on the outside looking in, the cult may be portrayed as purple-robed zealots, but make no mistake, the Cult of the Dragon remains a persistent thorn to many across the realms, dabbling in their dark magics of lichdom, worship to the Dragon Queen, and shady alliances across the spectrum of the foul and villainous. Sammaster is ash, Algashon dust, and the Tome of the Dragon relegated to a relic of a bygone age. Yet the cult endures. It persists not in those ancient texts of prophecy, but in the arrogant heart and those who seek to transcend their own mortality for some form of eternal servitude to dragonkind, living and even in undeath. For as long as mighty dragons walk the realms and mortals seek to serve or control them, there will always be a dragon cult, ready to offer a promise, a phylactery, and a chain. As we have clearly learned today, the Cult of the Dragon demands your soul in exchange for power. I, on the other hand, ask only for a click. But don't close the tome just yet. We have one final seal to break momentarily as a thank you for making it this far and enduring the obligatory channel promotion to keep the lights on, or candles burning. Believe me when I tell you I hate this part as much as you. However, the good news is, unlike Sammaster, you don't need a contingency spell to ensure the return of continuous lore. Just smite that like button and subscribe to bind my channel to your feed. And for those who wish to join the Lore Inner Circle and its growing library of HD art and world-building resources, my Patreon is where the original tomes are kept. You can join for free with no obligation, or support the channel for as little as a single copper. Or would that be a gold piece? Not sure, it's $1, $1 a month. My wit fails me. And finally, sincere thank yous go out to my amazing channel members and Patreon supporters who allow me to make this content. And a special thank you to Daniel Dragon, who chose this lore topic through the Director's Chair perk over on my Patreon. Daniel, you are a patron with clearly impeccable, if dangerous, taste in lore. Now brush the ash from your robes and follow me. It's time to make the acquaintance of some notable undead dragons. Our expedition into the undying lineage of dragonkind must begin with an important disclaimer as well as a few clarifications you might not be familiar with. To start us off, it must be said that this single chapter can only scratch the surface of the available Dracolich lore. In my research for this volume, I was surprised to learn that there exist no less than 50 named true dragon Dracoliches in just the Forgotten Realms. So any proper coverage requires a far more dedicated study than any single chapter could hope to provide. To that end, I will be producing some standalone volumes on some of the more infamous of these Dracoliches, so be sure to sound off in the comments and let me know which undead dragons you think are most deserving of the spotlight. One of the more common misconceptions regarding the Dracolich is found in their visuals. For those who like to tell tall tales in taverns but have likely never encountered or even seen a Dracolich in the wild, they almost universally describe these undead as skeletal bone dragons. Exceptions certainly exist, including one we will meet today, but the truth, more often than not, is that for most Dracoliches, their visuals skew much closer to how they appeared in life, only significantly more decayed. One of the more interesting distinctions unique to all of dragonkind is found in the 2003 Draconomicon. In addition to the no less than 50 named Dracoliches, the lore is also filled with stories of mighty dragons who contemplated but never actually went through the Lichdom process. Hopefully you recall that while dragons experience no frailty of their mind or body to signal their coming death, those nearing a millennia of existence, usually around 800 years and older, are still acutely aware of its arrival. This is notable because the text of the Draconomicon tell us that venerable and ancient dragons have three options as they enter their twilight. They are called departure, guardianship, and Dracolichdom. Departure is, as you might imagine, pretty self-explanatory, a more gentle word for death. Guardianship, on the other hand, is quite fascinating and provides the long-lived dragons an opportunity to transform oneself into a part of the world they are leaving. The lore said to offer the dragon their finality as a major landform, such as a mighty mountain, desolate desert, icy tundra, treacherous swamp, or peaceful grove. You may have noticed my use of the separate distinctions between undead dragons and Dracoliches, which is a nice segue into a maybe not so obvious but still important disclaimer. And that is, at least in the context of our discoveries today, we must clearly distinguish those undead dragons transformed through the ritual of Draconic Lichdom, true dragon Dracoliches, from other undead dragons that may have originated through different means, or those transformations unrelated to the cult of the dragon. There are draconic undead across the realms that arise through dark magic or other unnatural mechanisms. These, of course, include the more garden variety monster manual types, your typical zombie dragons and skeletal bone dragons, but also other named undead dragons, such as the Dread King Athas Dragoth from the Dark Sun universe. Or for you Baldur's Gate 3 fans, Ansur, the former bronze-turned-sleeping undead dragon of Baldur's Gate. That said, unlocking the secrets of undeath is a path littered with failures and partial successes, and Sammaster's decades-long experiment searching for the definitive undead dragon found many detours along the way, yielding some dangerous deviations. So I think it is more than appropriate to mention the existence of at least two such vampiric creations that, while falling outside the boundaries of true dragon lichdom, were instrumental undead variants that paved the way forward to proving Sammaster's theory of draconic undeath. Vampiric dragons are true undead dragons. However, their creation fell short of Sammaster's expectations in that they lacked the phylactery-based immortality of the Dracolich, a trait deemed essential for the fulfillment of the prophesized eternal rule. Capnolathil was a rare variant known as a smoke drake. He would more commonly be known as Brimstone, a predominantly charcoal gray-scale dragon with an infrequent smattering of iridescent crimson scales. Brimstone possessed the power of shape-shifting, allowing him to transform into clouds of ember and smoke. Brimstone was hot to the touch and possessed 2 cloud breath weapons of smoke and a haze of blindness. But what is most notable about Brimstone was his place in the lore as Sammaster's first experiment into Draconic Lichdom that actually survived. However, instead of achieving the immortality of undeath as promised, Brimstone became a vampiric dragon. Considered a failure by Sammaster, Brimstone was discarded by the cult, a rejection that fostered a deep animus for the first speaker, leading to Brimstone's role in Sammaster's final destruction in the Rage of Dragons event. Much of Brimstone's story is captured in the Year of Rogue Dragons trilogy of novels, The Rage, The Right, and The Ruin. Jacksaniah de Gore, or Jax as I have chosen to call him, was another obscure but powerful vampiric green dragon said to easily eclipse ancient blue dragons in terms of scale. Unlike his red variant cousins who seek destruction, Jax mostly craved control, and the lore tells us Jax gained immense regional authority, claiming the majority of Chesenta and Threskel as his domain. His ascent was tied to the power of a true dragon Dracolich I will talk about in a moment, Alasglur Banbastos, the great bone worm whom Jax served as his most prominent vassal. Jax solidified his status over many years, ultimately proclaiming himself the Viceroy of Threskel. His mandate involved demanding regular tribute from the human kings of the region and has been known to further exploit mankind by assuming the guise of an aspect of the untheric god Asurin. This vampiric lord of Threskel lairs beneath Mount Thulbane in Chesenta and is believed to be still active to this day. Moving not only away from the cult of the dragon for a moment, but off-world completely, we must take a moment to acknowledge perhaps the most storied of true dragon Dracoliches, the favored consort of Tiamat, Dragotha, widely considered to be the OG Dracolich, said to exceed 2,500 years in age. However, Dragotha not only exists outside of Realms lore, originating from the world of Greyhawk, but also found its undeath through divinity, granted by Caius, whose own origin is a crazy rabbit hole all itself. Existing as a central god of undeath in the Greyhawk universe, a Sarlonan wizard who ascended to become a demigod of death in Eberron, and believe it or not, a far realm elder evil in our own Forgotten Realms. Those deviations aside, and with the waters ahead now about as clear as a mineral swamp, let's talk about a few of the cult's most notable Dracoliches. While Dragotha is considered the first ever Dracolich, as previously mentioned, Shargralar the Dark holds the distinction of being the initial triumph of Sammaster's vision of undeath, transformed in 902 DR. Originally a mighty red dragon dwelling in the Thunder Peaks, Shargralar's transformation to become the cult's first sacred one both validated the cult's status as well as establishing the base template for subsequent procedures. This is most significant to the cult's fortunes because when it comes to consuming a potion of instant death based on unconfirmed theories and a promise of resurrection in Lichdom, nobody wants to be the first. And the lore makes clear that while Shargralar was the first night dragon of the cult, many dragons before him met their forever death in experimental sacrifice. However, with the Dark One's successful transformation, the cult would utilize Shargralar for political and economic control, and he would be a loyal ally of the cult for the next 455 years, until the Dracolich met his end in 1357 DR at the hands and legendary spellfire of Chandrel Cheshire. Chandrel, the story of her archmage parents, their conflicts with the cult of the dragon, and how this relatively young rogue came about acquiring Spellfire is its own interesting tale. But what is relevant to our Dracolich coverage is that Chandrel Cheshire had a busy year in 1357, taking part or being present in the destruction of 3 cult Dracoliches during the Year of the Prince. The triad of destruction began with Roglethgor, a red Dracolich night dragon who laired beneath Myth Draenor. His destruction was the direct result of an encounter orchestrated by the female cult mage Simgaril Marul, who entrusted the Red Dracolich with the custody of Chandril. While the lore is decidedly scant on the exact details, what is known is that an explosive confrontation erupted in Roglathor's lair, where Chandril's innate command of spellfire unexpectedly detonated, unleashing the immense, raw, and chaotic power of the Weave. The result was the absolute obliteration of the Dracolich and his lair, said to consume all present cult members and much of the surrounding terrain. This was soon followed by the demise of a blue Dracolich named Aughastam, destroyed by Elminster in a battle Chandril participated in. This undeniably bad year for the cult, then ending with the aforementioned destruction of the cult's most prized sacred one in Shargrilar the Dark. While Shargrilar has not been seen since, rumors do persist that his phylactery survived, with legends insisting that it is now held as a prized possession in the hoard of another night dragon we only briefly mentioned earlier, Orglor Oasa. Known as the Sibilant Shade, Orglor Oasa was a female shadow dragon, also originating from deep within the Thunder Peaks, and probably best known in the lore for causing the fall of the dwarven city of Thunderholm in the year of Trolling Terrors 1054. She would undergo Lichdom by the Cult of the Dragon some 268 years later in 1322, the year of Lurking Death, and according to modern lore is today alive and well, or unalive and well. Now, you can't mention the Sibilant Shade without also mentioning her mother, Shishuru, the Shadow Wing. The limited lore we have confirms that her submission to Lichdom occurred before that of her daughter's transformation, and that this occurred sometime in the early 14th century, so we can presume that would have happened sometime between 1300 and 1322, when Orglor Oasa achieved her undeath. One interesting lore facet is tied to a specific dragon cult cell that actually performed her transformation. Based in the city of Burdusk, which can be found a bit inland of the Sword Coast and east of the Woods of Sharp Teeth along the river Kianthar. Burdusk is an active trading hub, but also known to have a significant presence of Harpers, and as we have learned today, the Harpers are longtime adversaries of the Cult of the Dragon. Shishuru makes her lair in the far hills, and is said to be still active today, should you and your party ever feel like hunting down a Dracolich. However, the primary reason to include Shishuru the Shadowwing in this chapter is to both illustrate what is perhaps the best look at the other side of Lichdom, its failures, as well as to provide what I personally think would make an exceptional adventure hook. The lore of Shishuru makes special note of her insistence that the cult also transform an old red dragon named Greshruk the Red-Eye. Greshruk would be only the second attempt at draconic lichdom conducted by that particular Burduskan cell of the cult, an attempt that would end in failure. But it was not due to any lack of experience that caused the disaster to follow. You see, it's no coincidence that I mention the Harper's strong presence held in Burdusk, because it would be during the end of Old Red-Eye's ritual of undeath that a group of Harpers stormed the lair to assault the cult wizards mid-chant, ending in the death of all cult members present and an unfortunate fate for Greshruk. The result of this Harper raid was the disembodied soul of Greshruk, now trapped in his intended phylactery of ruby and glass steel. The scattered lore offering only that the soul gem found its way into the pommel of a powerful +4 longsword named Dragon's Tooth. The apocryphal tales continue that Dragon's Tooth was stolen by a rogue Harper agent. Now wanted by both the Harpers and the cultists, the thief would be tracked and slain, but the Dragon's Tooth longsword was nowhere to be found, and according to modern-day lore is still lost, out there somewhere, just waiting to be found, perhaps by you. A glass steel and ruby +4 longsword with a gemmed phylactery in the pommel, containing the soul of a sentient red dragon with who knows what powers? Hey man, if you can't world build something amazing with that, then perhaps you need to watch more of my videos. Some additional early transformations of the cult include the black dragon Adenthia of the Mirror of Dead Men, transformed around 922 DR, and Aglaudix, a black Dracolich who laired in the north. The legacy and fate of Adenthia would culminate in his spirit being bound to the unwilling body of a living green dragon following the Spell Plague, while the Harpers found the lair of a Glaudix in 1065 DR, destroying the Night Dragon and seizing its hoard to continually fund their internal mission of eradicating the cult. The cult's offer of immortality would often sell best to those dragons who were deeply vulnerable. Dracorage, or Dretch, is a venerable green dragon who was well known as both a merciless hunter and also defined by his cowardice. Dretch would usually only fight when cornered, preferring the use of traps and the terrain to weaken and distract rather than face his enemies in the open. His submission to Undeath in 1365 was a measure of desperation. While still a powerful Dracolich, the lore does view him as a wretched and pitiful figure, a dragon who traded the vibrancy of life for the safety of a phylactery, proving that the cult's promise appeals as much to the weak as the strong. At the other end of the spectrum is Kistarianth the Red, a crimson Dracolich of tragedy and irony who symbolized the cult's aggression and audacity in the 14th century, assaulting Waterdeep in 1369. His demise is a unique footnote in Realms lore. As a living dragon, Kistarianth was slain by Athar the Shining Knight. In Undeath, he would later be destroyed by Athar's son, Pirgeron Paladinson, the Open Lord of Waterdeep, using the very same blade, and thus holds the distinction of being the only dragon to be killed in life and death by a father and a son. There is also the tale of Vertark, an adult blue dragon who had the misfortune of being transformed into a Dracolich against his will by cultists who used a cursed item disguised as a headband of intellect in order to compel the dragon's submission. Each of these Dracoliches have many more stories to tell, so if one piques your interest, be sure to let me know in the comments. So many of these deserve their own spotlight, and that goes double for these last two most infamous Dracoliches. The first is perhaps the most visually striking of the Night Dragons, Alasglur Banbastos, a mighty Dracolich that would come to be known as the Great Bone Worm. In life, Alasglur Banbastos was an ancient blue worm who sought the ritual of undeath in the wake of his rival, the Red Tyrant Chazar, ascending to godhood in 1018. The Morktar cell of the dragon cult performed his transformation to cement his rule from the Dragonback Mountains in Threskel. And the Great Bone Worm is the exception to the visual rule, as his name implies, legitimizing the stereotype visuals of a huge skeletal worm cracking with blue lightning. Alasglur Banbastos has many tales, from his storied battles against the mythic Red Dragon Chazar for supremacy in Unther and Threskel, to holding the distinction of having his physical form twice destroyed in a single year, 1479, the year of the Ageless One. Yet today his phylactery persists with the dread warning of yet another future resurrection. The final Dracolich of infamy we are mentioning today is both the symbol of ultimate power and undeath, as well as the cult's loss of control. Daurgothoth, the Creeping Doom, is an undead dragon that, for many scholars who study such things, represents the unholy apex of Draconic Lichdom. Not only is the colossal, great, black, undying worm the most powerful of all Dracoliches, Daurgothoth is among the most powerful of all beings in faerun, rivaling even the power of many gods. The beyond genius Black Worm is an archmage of staggering power, who submitted himself to the ritual of undeath only to then immediately slay his creator, cult mage Hulukarn, and break his bonds of control to the cult's influence. Daurgothoth, as a subject of necromantic and draconic study, offers many unique facets of lore you simply won't find anywhere else. From his Underdark lair beneath the abandoned gnome city of Dolblund, the unrivaled Dracolich is obsessed with self-supremacy and the dark arts, eternally consumed by his ultimate ambition of fathering a new race of living Dracoliches. His grotesque experiments continue unabated to this day, with the possibility of his success making him perhaps the most single dangerous independent entity across all of Toril. It should be noted here that if Daurgothoth were to achieve his goal, he renders the cult of the dragon obsolete, at least that faction that holds fast to Sammaster's prophecy. Imagine that. Potentially the greatest irony across all of Realms lore, found in a cult that has spent 5 centuries trying to unleash dragons to their doomsday vision, only to have created a progenitor that needs neither their prophecy nor their help. But we won't have much time to gloat because, frankly, if Dargothoth succeeds in breeding a race of living Dracoliches, we might as well just hand over the keys to Terrell and find a nice quiet demi-plane to retire in. This one's been fun. Until next time, please remember, if a stranger in purple robes offers you a drink, just say no, because the hangover, it lasts forever.